Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me, as always, is Danny Gillette, my co host for this podcast. And we're back for another episode after what was a heartbreaking loss for the Nebraska volleyball team on Thursday night. It was difficult. I couldn't even bring myself to write about it. I was convinced that team was going to win, but so just wanted to start off the show with that and just to say thank you to, a truly tremendous group of young women. Yes, it was disappointing that they didn't win the national championship, but, like Lexi Rodriguez, 3 Final Fours in 4 years, 4-time All-American, Merritt Beeson, Harper Murray, John Cook. I know a lot of people are criticizing them, but I think that they put forth a great effort. And sometimes, you have 2 great teams and one has to lose. And that was the case on Thursday night. So nothing but pride for me in terms of Husker volleyball.
You talk about, program defining groups. And it seems like, in each sport, each program has at least, one every couple or so years. And for me, this was a program defining group for the volleyball team. And, I thought John Cook did another tremendous job this year, given how the season started and how things looked to be, trending downward. And yet he was able to pull the team together, and they went on an absolute tear. They didn't just win; they went on an absolute tear. And for this group in particular, they'll be talked about not only this season but throughout their entirety of Lincoln here as trendsetters, table setters, really influential figures within the Husker volleyball program. And it was really tough to see them kind of go out this way, but that's just the way it is, I guess. I mean, this was a good match. This was a good season, and it's going to be interesting to see who comes up next for the program and who is that trendsetter, that table setter, that program defining group. And Cook can recruit, and so I'm sure they'll be coming in short order along with what they have on the roster already. But man, this team was really something special, and this group was really something special.
It was something special, and not many Nebraska teams are hanging Big Ten championship banners, and they did that again this year. So I mean, let's not forget about that. They made it to the Final Four, but not everybody. When you think about like college basketball, right? There's the one shining moment. It can't be the one shining moment for everybody, and that's unfortunately in sports. Not everybody gets the Cinderella story. So I wish like hell that it happened for like Lexi Rodriguez. It hurt to see her crying last night, but she's a warrior and she'll be playing professional volleyball. And, Nebraska is better for her for having all these players. So at any rate, great season for those guys. And let's get into some transfer portal talk. Before we do, though, please make sure if you guys haven't, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as well if you haven't already to the Husker Big Red podcast. But we've had a flurry of transfer portal activity since our last episode, which was one Monday. We'll try to get a little bit more consistent with that. But at any rate, on Thursday, 2 commitments for Nebraska. Cal wide receiver Nyziah Hunter, 6'2", 205 pounds, a redshirt freshman last season, 578 yards, 40 receptions, 5 touchdowns. So big-time playmaker there, but wasn't the only commitment on Thursday. Defensive lineman Gabe Moore, 6'4", 290 from Mississippi State, came over. Hasn't really played much. He was expected to be in the mix for the 2 deep this year, redshirted for medical reasons, so he's coming over. We also had Jack McAllister, the punter from Washington, who committed earlier this week to replace Brian Buschini. And then also defensive lineman Jalen George from East Tennessee State, who's coming up, 6'2", 265. I want to say his measurements, 23 pressures last year, first team All Southern Conference. So it has been a busy week. And then on the departure side of it, Dante Dowdell was probably the biggest one. Xander Rigoroli, he transferred last night, which doesn't shock me based on how he came in. Probably the roster limit there because he was kind of on an NIL deal. But Dowdell did surprise me a little bit. So we'll get to that in a second. But man, a flurry of transfer portal moves. Let's start with Nyziah Hunter. What are your thoughts on that, who I think is one of the biggest additions Nebraska's made so far?
Yeah, absolutely love it. He's a veteran wide receiver. And by veteran, it means he played only last year as a freshman. I love his multiple years of eligibility, and we're seeing that trend with, several of the Nebraska transfers so far, multiple years of eligibility. He's a big wide receiver. Nebraska has smaller playmakers and, Barney, Jalen Lloyd, things like that. But I really wanted to see them get a bit of a taller receiver, a bigger playmaker, and Hunter is that guy. I mean, he has speed, he has that downfield playmaking ability. Holgerson and Matt Rule really liked him. This is one of their priority targets, and I can certainly see why. When you look at Dana Holgerson type of offense, he may not be entirely air raid and entirely throw the football, but it's a big part of what they're going to do. So Hunter fits that bill. I love, again, that he has multiple years of eligibility and that he has already shown production during his freshman season. And I think, his best football is yet to come.
Yeah, when I look at his highlights, his tape or whatever, what I see is a Jamal Banks type, but better, a more explosive, a more athletic Jamal Banks, because this is a guy that, you can throw kind of those 50-50, passes to. You can throw that fade up to him because he's 6'2", but he's got that ability to go get the ball. He's got big, strong hands. What I liked about him last year is, when I was looking at his stats, he had 3 receptions or more, I think, in like 10 of 12 games. He had multiple receptions in 11 of 12 games last season. So this is a guy that, is producing 10 of 12 games last year. He had at least 30 yards. So there was very few games where he just like disappeared. And the fact that, Nebraska's getting him for 3 years. And I know people are like, whoa, it's the transfer portal. How can you expect him to stay here for 3 years? Well, you can't. I mean, that's just, everybody's on a 1-year deal right now. And the sooner that we all realize that and just accept it, that that's the way that it is right now, there's no point in complaining about the system. Like, it just is what it is. Coaches are frustrated with it. I'm sure there's players frustrated with it, administrators, but, until it changes, like, that's just the reality of the situation. And, but in terms of like this offense, Nebraska needed a number 1 receiver. And in my opinion, they got one on Thursday in Nyziah Hunter. And you put him with Cortez Mills and with, Ja'Cory Barney and Jalen Lloyd and Carter Nelson and Quinn Clark. And, you've got something. You've got something here. Now, I still – Dane Key's visiting. I wouldn't mind another receiver, but to me, it feels more like a luxury than a necessity at this point.
Yeah, and I feel like, there were reports that he was committed to Georgia. That was actually a fake X account, so that really wasn't him. And I think actually Kirby Smart followed that account. So there you go. But
we can all get tricked.
Yeah, he hasn't committed anywhere yet. He's visiting on Friday. I'm wondering, what our chances are there. I would love Key, but I'm certainly happy with Hunter. I'm starting to sort of kind of predict the starting wide receivers in my head, and I think you mentioned some of them there. Would you put Cortez Mills in the starting lineup as a freshman? Because I would feel comfortable doing that given his playmaking ability.
I don't know that he'll start, but I think he'll be like Ja'Cory Barney last year, where he wasn't like a starter, but he led the team in receptions. Started at the end of the year. I think the starting lineup, the starting 3 are going to be Hunter, Ja'Cory Barney, and I think it's going to be Jeranian Bonner, just like kind of like last year. I think he'll have a little bit of a bigger role, but I think he'll be, the starter. But I think in terms of snaps played, like I think Cortez Mills will probably play just as many, or if not more snaps than him. And I'm interested to see what they do, with Carter Nelson too. Like, is he going to be a tight end? Is he going to be a receiver? Is he going to be kind of both? Like, is Nebraska going to use him like USC, used Deuce Robinson? So there's kind of some interesting questions, but and I do think Jalen Lloyd too. I think Jalen Lloyd is going to have a chance to hopefully have a bigger year this year. And I'm watching Quinn Clark because there's a reason he passed Malachi Coleman on the depth chart. So, and I know everybody wanted to say that Malachi wasn't trying and all this stuff, but he did. Matt Rule did say that he was like scout team player of the week at one point during that kind of stretch where he wasn't, he was redshirting and not playing. And Quinn Clark still kind of passed him up on the depth chart, and that's why he left. And so I want to see what Quinn Clark can do. Like, show me why the coaches were willing to take you on that trip to USC and not Malachi Coleman. So I want to see that. And, I'm kind of excited to see what these guys do in the bowl game. Dana Holgerson talked about that yesterday with like Quentin Ives and Emmett Johnson, some of these guys stepping up, and he's right. Like, somebody leaving in the portal is an opportunity for somebody else. And I'm excited to see who takes advantage of those opportunities next Saturday.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Ives was a guy that was talked about, and I think it's going to be Emmett Johnson starter, Ramir Johnson at 2, and Ives at the 3. So we'll get to see Ramir play in his final game as a Nebraska football player, and talk about loyalty and talk about a whirlwind of a career for Johnson. I mean, he's been through the gauntlet, and yet he still stayed with the program. So I'm hoping he has a solid final game and can really make an impact next Saturday.
And then in terms of like Gabe Moore, I know some fans were kind of complaining about this one, but this is
What
more of a
don't they
depth
complain about,
move.
Chris?
Yeah, there's some that do complain about everything. And some people just like to complain, which that's your prerogative, I guess. But Gabe Moore, 6'4", 290. And when I look at this defensive line, lost Kai Wallen, Vincent Carroll Jackson, they needed some size. And
Yeah.
this is a guy who, like I said, last year was expected to contribute or at least be in the two deep for Mississippi State. And if he can come in here and just be on the two deep this year at 6'4", maybe get him up to 310, maybe he could be, a backup nose, behind Van Poppel if that's the way things are trending. But yeah, a young defensive lineman from the SEC with 4 years to play, like, sign me up. I don't know why people would be upset about that.
I don't know why people would be upset about that either. And the reality is people want a stud pass rusher from the portal and this, that, and the other thing. Well, I don't think we're gonna get one, to be quite honest with you, from that position. And as long as the secondary can hold, and I understand that's a big if, I don't think we need a Ty Robinson or a Nash type player on the defensive line. For one, they're not easy to find. Two, I feel like schematically, this defense is going to be a little bit different. And I think we're going to have to see a lot more out of guys like McGahee, Shavers, Van Poppel, Cam Leonard, guys like that. So I don't think you're going to necessarily see one player who is the bona fide pass rusher on the defense. I think it's more going to be a cumulative effort. But, I still do think there's depth options on the defensive line.
Yeah, I'd like to see him add, another edge type player
Yeah.
if they could. But, they did add Jalen George this week, and I thought he was kind of a nice replacement for Jamari Butler, a guy that's not really like an edge, more of a traditional kind of like, to me, Jamari Butler's like a traditional 4-3 end who can kind of be a stand-up pass rusher type, so that's how I view Jalen George. Had 23 pressures last year, not a ton of sacks, but, sometimes sacks just don't, they're hard to get sometimes in college football with the way quarterbacks throw the football and the spread offenses and things like that. So you see that all the time where guys like have 4.5 sacks in the NFL and then they go their rookie year and have like 12. So I mean, he's 23 pressures is still like, that's 2 per game. That's exactly what Nebraska kind of needs. So another depth piece there. And I like McAllister getting one of the best punters in the Big Ten. But overall, I guess looking into it, a couple of weeks in, still a lot of time left. And that's the other thing. There's still a lot of ways to go. But what's your grade on this transfer portal class so far? Williams Noweri, Jalen George, let's see, Hunter, McAllister, the long snapper, and then the dude from Mississippi State. But still, obviously, a lot of other guys out there. I know we haven't got an offensive lineman yet. There's still some targets there.
We did have a visitor on Wednesday. I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, Fee-Fi-Fo Fum. But Faili Faumore, at any rate, he's the number 2 offensive tackle in the transfer portal, according to 24/7 Sports. Played a lot for Washington State. Not Michigan, but Nebraska did miss on Isaiah World, who went to Oregon. Big shock. Phil Knight money there. But I like this guy. And the other guy I like, Keegan Trost, 6'4" tackle who played for Wake Forest last year, played 766 snaps last year. So, I mean, this is a guy that could come in and play tackle for you, and I think you'd be okay. And there's some other guys kind of rolling in there. I do think that the kid from Washington State is going to be tough to land, but Nebraska, that's the thing, though. Like, I know they didn't get Isaiah World, but I don't think they get him on campus for a visit if like they weren't willing to pay. So I feel like money-wise, they're going to be in it with this kid from Washington State, which Michigan is too, and that's not going to be it. But I feel like they're willing to pay for an offensive tackle. Though. Just hopefully it works out.
I'm interested to see what happens with Dane Key because he's still taking a visit, and I know he's been trending to Georgia and things. But if we could get Dane Key and Hunter, I would be very happy.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely. That's the thing too. Is like, And Lincoln Riley kind of attributed, like, you only have so much NIL money. He was talking about that Zachariah Branch, who's like, oh, I'm a receiver who wants to make $4 million. Like, it's hard to pay a receiver $4 million because just the NIL funds are limited. So it's like, if Dane Key's going to get a big payday, I'd rather that maybe go to somebody else, but I don't know if that's the case. So, but yeah, I think it's going to be interesting. I know people want that offensive lineman, and I agree. I think this team needs an offensive tackle badly, and I'm still confident that they'll get one. So, what's your grade so far in this transfer portal haul? Well, like, if you would assign a letter grade just so far on these 6 guys, what would it be through about a week and a half of transfer portal stuff?
Probably a B minus because we really did need a long snapper. We really did need another punter. We got some defensive line help, and I know people are kind of upset about that. But the way I look at those two signings, you got an all conference player, and then you got one with SEC experience and more. The all conference player being George, and to me, that allows the 2025 class to develop and have a year of development under their belt, and that's why I think those two pickups are important in particular, just to help that really really good 2025 defensive line group kind of get their feet under them. So I think that's important. And Hunter obviously is a dynamic playmaker. It's just more weapons at the wide receiver room. And Dylan Raiola, it's been reported that he has been in all dinners and meetings with transfer targets. So I imagine Hunter got Raiola's seal of approval. And so yeah, I'd like to see them add maybe one more wide receiver and another offensive lineman, but B minus so far. And I think they've done a really good job of addressing needs. Quite honestly, long snapper and punter were probably two of the bigger ones.
Yeah, so I'm gonna give it so far an A minus, I'll say, because I do think that they need an offensive and defensive tackle, but there's still plenty of time to do that. And you come out with Noweri, a guy that would be the highest ranked recruit to ever come to Nebraska, basically. If you look at his original recruiting ranking. So I think that's a dynamic player and a game changer. When you talk about like adding guys in the portal, like he's a game changer for multiple years. And I would say the same about Nyziah Hunter. So to get 2 guys like that, like 2 top 100 guys in the transfer portal, I think is huge. And then, yeah, prioritizing the special teams because, I think it's smart. Other teams are spending their NIL money on these big players. Well, Nebraska went out and filled 2 pretty big needs, and they prioritized it quickly. Now they're done with that. They're not going to be sitting here looking for a long snapper or a punter in April. They've got 2 really, and they got probably the best on the market at both positions. So, like, you got to give them a tip of the cap there. And I like how they have replenished this defensive line with some depth pieces. You got Noweri, George, more, and then you add those guys with Keanu Davis, with Riley Van Poppel, with Cameron Leonard. You've got some pieces there. Malcolm Simpson coming in, Tyson Terry. They still probably need maybe another pass rusher or so, but I still think that they've done a pretty good job, and they got to add those trenches. I would love to see the guy I want them to add outside of this left tackle that we can't pronounce or right tackle that we can't pronounce, Andrew Marshall. Get this guy, get him signed. I think he would start right away and be a big impact player for this defense. So.
And he's built like the type of player like an NFL corner, and that's what John Butler wants to look for. And Williams Noweri is going to be, I believe, a dynamic playmaker off the edge. I understand he didn't play a ton last year, but the potential is there, the skill is there, and so I'm very interested to see what he can bring for Nebraska. And I think it was a really, really good job by them to land him. And, that's where shout out to Jamar Mosey. I mean, he has been really, really influential on the recruiting trail. And we've been able to, have and make connections with, several Missouri guys. And that's a credit to Mosey. And so shout out to him. I know people were wondering what his role was and stuff like that. Well, right now it's a recruiter, and he's been doing a really, really good job. And I think, I was excited when he was added to the staff at the time, and I feel like his impact has been extremely important, and he's shown what he can do.
Yeah, I agree. A big impact there. We saw some of those other coaches announced this week. So the coaching staff about finalized. Last topic wanted to cover just quickly here to wrap it up on Friday. So who out of these 6 guys do you think will make the biggest impact? Who's the biggest impact addition so far for Nebraska in the transfer portal?
Nyziah Hunter. I mean, we have a bunch of speedy, shorter wide receivers, and they're very young, but they're very, very talented. But having a veteran playmaker in Hunter, I think is extremely important. One with size, one with athleticism, and I really think that he is going to be a key player for this offense. Kind of in the role like we were talking about off air, like Jamal Banks and Isaiah Neo were, the veteran presence. But I think he's a little bit better than those two, with room to grow.
Yeah, and definitely, I mean, I could copy that answer. I really love Nyziah Hunter, watching his highlights, but I'm gonna say, eventually it's gonna be Williams Newary, and I think it might take him some time. I don't expect him to come in and be an all-conference player right away, but I do think that this is the most talented defensive lineman Nebraska's probably had since Randy Gregory, and I think by the end of the season, I think we're going to start seeing that impact. And so, yeah, I think Nyziah Hunter, though, is going to be, like I said, I think he's going to be the number one receiver. I think he's going to lead this team probably in receptions and catches. And it's going to be fun to watch him and Dylan Raiola build that rapport here over the next few months before the season starts.
And honestly, this may seem like kind of a joke, but Kevin Gallick, the long snapper, it's not a joke at all. I really do believe he'll have a big impact, because if you have a competent I hate saying a competent long snapper like I'm dissing the guys that are already on the roster, but if you have, a veteran long snapper, I'll say we win 8 games last year.
Yeah, and we've talked about that, but yeah, Kevin Gallick going to be a big addition, and McAllister a big one too. Like I said, they got the top 2 guys at those positions, and those were 2 positions of need. And as we've seen, not just last year, but over the last like 4 or 5 years, special teams, if you're bad, will cost you games. So I'm glad that they shored up those needs, and that's probably one of the reasons I have such a high grade on them so far. So let's get a tackle, offense and defensive tackle. Let's get a cornerback, and then maybe an edge, and let's go. That's how I feel about it. I feel it's a pretty good class so far.
Absolutely. And I feel like they've addressed all their needs. I know people want sexy names and sexy positions, like long snapper is not a sexy position, but they've done a good job of identifying what they need and going out and getting it. So
they did do that, and who knows, by Monday, the next episode we'll probably have another edition. We'll at least, I'm sure, have some more news over the weekend, so check back with us for our next episode on Monday. We'll be back. If you haven't already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get into the comment section, let us know your letter grade for the Huskers, or who you think the biggest impact player will be so far in this transfer portal class. So please do that. Thanks as always for joining us, and as always, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.